Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Sales Syndicate podcast. I'll be hosting this week. I'm Ellis Campbell. I'm the head of enterprise here at Selligence, and I'm joined by my colleague Nic Biffen, who's the head of sales. How you doing, Nic?
Very good. How are you?
I'm good. Apart from, for those who can actually see the YouTube video, I have got a shockingly terrible mustache for November. So doing my bit for the podcast listeners. You're very lucky you don't have to see part of that. But other than that, I'm very good.
It'll take me about 10 years to
So this week we're going to be talking and discussing cold calling, tactics that work well from our time in sales, from managing sales teams, and just generally how we see that working moving forward as well. You know, there's a lot of people out there at the moment discussing, is cold calling dead? What's the best way to move it forward? So I thought, who better to bring on than the man who's literally running a team of people who are doing that pretty much day in, day out. So maybe it's a good starting point. You know, how have you found it, especially maybe in the last few months? Have you seen it changing it? Is it something you still believe holds a lot of value?
100%. I think I'd probably start right at the bit. It absolutely drives me crazy when people saying cold calling is dead. I think, you know, sales was born off it. It was started on it. I mean, there's a million and one Jordan Belfort podcasts out there people can listen to and videos, but it's born off it. And actually now, you know, people that are sat there, you know, sending in their sequences, relying on those day to day, there's tons of firewalls and things that are now stopping actually those getting into the person you actually want them to be. Ultimately, phone number can't do that. It's, you know, start from floor one. The amount of people actually the team's sold to in the last 6, 7, 8 months, you say, oh yeah, cold calling's dead. And I will say to the guys, you know, ask them back there, how have we done this deal? It's always from a cold call. So I think quite often they're not, they're kind of put back a little bit by that, and you know, maybe a realisation is made for it.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting because I think the days when I first started out my sales career, I literally just had listed companies and go around and try and call through to them and offer your services. Maybe to an element that side is maybe not dead, but it's quieter, it's harder. Because I think it's a lot harder to get through switchboards and numbers. But I think maybe it's just the way you do it that's changing. You know, instead of it, I don't think cold calling is dead. I just think that just going there with very little research, calling someone and just product dumping is dead. I mean, what are you seeing with the team? I mean, I imagine you can't book many demos and just go and feature them. You know, I think maybe a lot of that comes from doing your homework, making it relevant, but you know, they probably do a lot more cold calling than I do these days. So,
do you know what, it's a difficult one. It's, you know, everybody has their own tactics. Everybody will try stuff, but you know, it's not one size fits all. It's not like you're gonna bring Joe Blobbs down the road and then, you know, bring Melanie, I don't know, Sharp down the other, and you're gonna have the same conversation. It's crazy, like, you know. I think the real part of it, ultimately, from the start, and let's be honest, cold calling can be pretty miserable at times.
Everyone's answering, yeah.
We've all been there, and you want to go home, and you're thinking, right, when am I getting my next beer? But you know, ultimately, have fun with it. I think is the biggest thing that often people forget about. You know, sales isn't hard. That's why it's lucrative. That's why people enjoy it, and that's why, you know, generally sales, you know, leaders, they want people that have got competitive backgrounds or certainly competitive edge, because it can be miserable. But, you know, ultimately the cold calling is the face of it, it's the heart of it, it's where you build up that prospect, that opportunity base. You've got to enjoy it. And I think sometimes I just set myself little challenges. It was like, okay, how far can I push this person? Like, can I almost push them to the brink? And you know, what can I get out of them? And I think often it's that fear of somebody picking up the phone and thinking, oh, I don't know, you know, how are they going to react or so forth. You know, the amount of people that, you know, happens every day. I think it happens to 2 people in my team today. They were told to fuck off when they picked up the call. But at the end of the day, have a conversation with them, have fun, and just push it, see how far you can go.
So what would be your words of advice for someone who's maybe newer into sales, where, you know, they haven't had the years of experience of cold calling, when they've learned, you know, not how to be resilient, but they've had those knockbacks, they've had it once. If you could like give someone who's trying to motivate someone pretty new into sales, they'd be like, just have the courage to go through and do it. What tips would you give them? I guess first of all, to actually try and make their cold calls more successful. But what tips would you give someone who's maybe they really struggle to do it? They're spending a lot more time doing research and the admin and trying to be strategic, but not because they want to be strategic, because ultimately they're a little bit scared of what will happen when they pick up and get on that phone. How would you manage that?
So I think the biggest tendency is, I've probably been guilty of this in my past, but you want to sit there first time on the phone. It's like, okay, what does this business do? What are they doing as an organisation? What are their expertise? Where are they selling into? And you try and do so much research on them. It's almost then you're almost more frightened to then make that call because you're like, what happens if I get something wrong?
You've put loads of pressure on yourself because you've gone, well, I've just spent 15 minutes researching this company. What if I muck it up now and actually get through to the decision maker and I've just wasted all that time?
Well, the best of all, you spend 15 minutes, you call them, they don't answer.
Well, so that's probably more likely than anything else. But no, I mean, I think you've raised a good point there. I think sometimes as salespeople, we always don't really get caught out. I think the main thing with cold calling is people always, the main concern and worry, you always worry that you're made to look stupid, or they ask you something you don't know, they can come with some sort of pushback that you can't overcome. But the irony is, the more cold calls you do, the more you go through it, regardless of whether someone gives you a difficulty. Sometimes you need to give you that objection so you can go away, discuss internally, chat to the person next to you. God, I've just had this pushback. How do we get around that? What can we do? Sometimes you need to have those cold calls and get those objections and then learn to overcome them. So the irony is that the more you shy away from it, the harder it becomes the longer you leave it. Whereas I think sometimes it's always a bit of a numbers game. Go through, calling up people. Someone's going to go, look, I'll give you a fair crack at the whip here. Give me your elevator pitch, tell me what you do, and see what happens when we go through it. But it's interesting. I mean, how much time would you suggest people do? When you've got the team, obviously we've got lots of tools and tech that really helps for doing that. But how long would you ideally want someone to be maybe researching the company before they go out and make that cold call?
Simple answer is I probably wouldn't. At the end of the day, like during your prospect time, that's where you're going out, you're identifying those businesses, and they're going to fit, our product's going to fit into their business in terms of the verticals that they're then selling in or how they're working. The ultimate part is you've done that. That's why they're in your prospect list to go after. Actually, where the real belief comes from is that SDR, the AE, whatever, then having the belief that the product they've got is then fitting a need, or there is potentially a need within that business. Once they prospect it, there's no reason why we can't absolutely kind of pummel through, the dials or the prospects that we've got to reach out to. Your product is there. Your product is, in most cases, yes, it might have a couple of different use cases, but it's doing one job.
So I guess what you're saying there is, rather than just having a long list, so I sell to a financial services, here's a long list of them. I guess what you're saying there is when you're actually sorting out your prospect list, whether it's the day before you go to do it or in your downtime, you're doing a normal sort of like account mapping, market mapping, whatever it is making sure that you've got ICPs there, because then ideally you don't have to do loads of research because you generally know, actually our product fits their market, their specifications. So when I get them a call, it's very unlikely I'm going to get called out for something because I know that market, that segment, because that's why they're my ICP, it's why they're my ideal customer.
I think that there's also the other part as well, and I think there's always a tendency where you're taught as young, no means no. It's not that at all, and I think it's understanding, one, who is it you're approaching, and actually what are their pain points. If they're a CMO, then they're going to have very, very different pain points to if they're a COO or a CIO, or even a CEO. But actually, when you're then reaching out, also understand actually what time they have. If you're likely talking to a CEO that's probably running around like a blue-ass fly, trying to raise funding, they're trying to manage the business, trying to build outside relationships, the chances of them being on the phone to somebody who's trying to pitch on a product for 10 minutes is nil. But actually, can you cut right through the bullshit, right to the front, and say, this is what we do. Appreciate it's not your remit who's going to be best to speak to. Oh, it's actually probably my MD or it's probably something else. However, on the flip side, if you're ringing a head of, or you're ringing somebody and you're doing more of a top-down, bottom-up approach, and you're ringing somebody at desk, they're going to have more time to speak to you. And it's sort of understanding those different pressures and who you've got to cut to the chase with as well, outside of that.
I think for me, you've hit the nail on the head. If I've done lots of cold calling in my time. I still do now. I'm working with the team. We're going through it. I mean, for me, and you even get this, even you interview for any sales job, the thing is, who have you sold to at the C-suite? Who have you got through? Talk me through a deal or opportunity you've worked on where you've influenced and convinced a CTO to jump onto a call with me. And the honest, transparent truth is I don't always get through to the CTO. It's not always feasible. And so that top-down, bottom-up approach for me is really powerful because, okay, if I can get in at the C-suite, and as you said, if I can speak to them for a minute and then get the time and then make it really relevant and find the perfect use case and get it, great. But that's really hard to do. Sometimes being able to talk to that AE level, that slightly, hopefully still someone who's got a bit of sway and influence, being able to talk to them, you can work your way up and level up towards that, basically the combined persona that we want to try and target and go after. And then my favourite story I've got for examples of being consistent with cold calling and doing that top-down, bottom-up approach. I remember I was trying to sell to, I think it was a bank in somewhere in Europe. I can't remember exactly where now. I managed to speak to someone who's head of the applications, talked to him through the service offering I was managing at the time. He basically told me, no, not interested, don't come back. I said, next year, do you want to brief the No, not of interest in it. Okay, fine, fair enough.
Here's a wine and dine.
Well, I could have given up then. Could have gone, do you know what? Yeah, I've spoken to the person. He manages the applications. It's probably not right. We just kept going. I only had this account. I had to keep sticking with it. It was one of the ones on my list. They're going, right, don't be single-threaded. And at the time, I'll be honest, I was reluctant to believe it. I was like, I've spoken to the head of applications. He's not going to buy it. But anyway, I persisted on, because that's what I was told by my sales director at the time. He was very right on this occasion. And I managed to call through and speak to someone else in the business, a different arm. They put me in touch with the CTO, who the head of applications reported into, and the other subdivisions are reported into. And then managed to convince him to get on the buy. And actually on the closing call where we worked through what the project was going to look like, I had to sit there with the actual head of application who told me no on the call with me.
How sweet was that though?
It's good, but I couldn't be too smug because at the same time they're still an influencer, so I still don't want them to, behind the scenes, potentially work away at that deal. But I think sometimes we can be a little bit single-threaded as salespeople. So, like for me, if I was going to have one tip for cold calling, it's just persistence and sticking with it, and to not be single-threaded and target just one persona. Make sure you're influencing different areas. And just the last point as well on that as well is that if you're really single-threaded, you might build a great relationship. That guy said, do you know what, I'm going to get budget in 2 months. I love this, I think it's great. He goes on gardening leave, or he goes off ill, or they have a change in the business, and all of a sudden that person you built a relationship with is gone, and you're back to square one again. So yeah, I think persistence and being multi-threaded is probably quite a key part within that.
A good one. Persistence, 100% is always the word to use. And I think the amount of people that forget they're actually only talking to people.
Yeah.
Like, you can catch somebody on a bad day, you can catch somebody who's just been in a meeting to fire half his team, or, whatever that may be. Actually, if you catch them at the wrong time, you might get a bit of a nasty bite back. But ring them another day, they may be absolutely fine. I think sometimes there's that fear that, I can't speak to them again, they weren't too pleasant last time I spoke to them, or whatever it may be. Everybody has bad days, and certainly have some.
It's a thick skin, isn't it? I mean, what's the worst? My opinion is, what's the worst that can happen? I call him or he or she up again, and they're not particularly happy with me again. And it's like, right, well, that's fine, until they outright say, and to be honest, maybe if there are any prospects out there that's listening to this podcast, that's probably what I'd say. If they don't give you definitive timeframes and they don't really kill or kill you off, it's our job to keep them persistent and going through. If someone turns around, no interest, or do you know what, I won't be ready for this for 3 months. Salespeople, good salespeople, should be pretty good. They'll check back in 3 months, or if they know there's absolutely zero chance, they're not going to waste their time and effort there as well. I mean, where you can have times where you've got to keep going is when you get those individuals go, well, not right now. Well, when do you want to do it? Yeah, I'll let you know, I'll come back to you.
It's always better to be told no. Have a definitive answer, a yes or a no, rather than being strung along for months.
Well, it's like that meme, isn't there? So you're telling me there's a chance. Every time you do it, you always hang on to that little bit of hope with it. But, I mean, yeah, I think persistence and fixing. I mean, it goes without saying. I know that's a bit of a cliche for sales, but I think it's one that you can really easily overlook when you actually don't just say it, put it into action in terms of, right, I'm going to be persistent. I'm still going to call this person back, or I'm going to, even though I'm talking to this person, I'm going to have the courage to go over and talk to a different person. It might get back to that person who's pied me before, that I'm trying to sell to a different part of the business, or I'm going above them. But I mean, ultimately, the worst that can happen is another contact tells you no, and you're in the exact same position you was. But the upside is you might find an opportunity, you might find a way in, and then you can have a good story to then share on a podcast in the future. So comes in quite a
I remember actually, it was in an old organisation that I was with, but it was always basically, as a sales team, it was like go out for a beer on Friday, come back into the office, and then you'd sit there and let other people pick which clients you had to call. So it was always, they'd pick and say, okay, who's your worst client? It'd be like this, they'd be like, them cool. And they'd sit there and everybody would surround you and see how you got onto it. But it was always actually great fun, but I'll tell you what, hell of a confidence builder, because where you actually start to turn those people around, it was, you're like, actually, I can speak to anybody here. I know I had some very, very, very rough ones.
The thing is, obviously, that's quite a salesy way of doing it. But like, what we're actually doing there is holding you accountable. Like, if you're sat there and you're managing your own time and your own list of prospects, you're going, right, we go back over the ones we think we're going to have the nice, warm, fuzzy conversations with. We do shy away from those ones who go, this person's going to be an absolute nightmare. I know it's going to be really difficult. But sometimes the best thing you can do is just maybe just have a day where you just go in, you do all the difficult conversations, you go through and have it. And then I think the big thing that doesn't always happen as well is just actually listening back and learning from it. So, I mean, when you have
reviewing your deal process, but I think just going back slightly to that point is actually, quite often, the people that are most upfront, most confrontational or abrupt, they're the people who you'll generally do quicker deals with. The people that are fluffy and milling around in the background, they're the people that are going to drag you out every months and months.
I don't mind someone blunt, because as long as I know my stuff and I know that what I'm trying to tell them is right and it's a good fit, they can be as blunt as they want, because you'll have an answer to their questions. It's when you've got that one that maybe isn't the ICP and they're a bit blunt, and then you're skirting around the edges where it becomes difficult. But I definitely think that the learning thing, the sessions I used to hate when I was first joining out, and I was largely trying to sell to NHS trusts and councils and calling around, notoriously difficult businesses, low amounts of money, hard to get into. They go, right, we're going to do a call listening session. And I know my managers there, I know my colleagues there. I would always pick a call that was pretty good, but I needed a bit of help with. I'd never go and go, do you know what? Here's the one I had an absolute nightmare on, where I really mucked it up and had all these issues. But I should have done, because ultimately the only way you're going to learn is to get that, if you've got 6 of you listening to a call, you've got 6 different people's opinions and perspective on it. So I think for anyone who's, whether they've been a more experienced cold caller, whether they've been doing it all their life, whether they're like us now, where we're heads of our own departments, but we still get involved with the team and do it. I mean, you're never too big to go and sit down and actually have other people reviewing, sit back on your calls. If you think you're going to finish an article, then that's probably where you stop improving.
Yeah, that's the thing with the guys now. We'll go into a room, do back-to-back calls. They do one, I do one. Stick on a loudspeaker, challenge each other. How many demos can you book? It's there because, one, I think if you enjoy sales, you enjoy it, and probably elements of you miss, like day to day. But ultimately, stuff always changes as well, isn't it? She said, never a finished article. But ultimately, Christ, the market shifts like there's no tomorrow as well. We've just gone from everybody hunky-dory and all going swimmingly well, suddenly into a recession inside really 3 months. I read a thing earlier saying they're now on about the deepest recession and that could last 3 years. The market switches so quick, but then with that, your picture's going to change, your approach. It's probably likely, as sort of thing the other day, actually saying how deal sizes at the moment have dropped and deal processes are getting longer because of the market. These are all things you've got to adapt to, take into account, but where you're actually then approaching your prospects and what you're doing, you've got to start to think around that in terms of how you position it as well.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, the market, everything changes, right? And I think that's why, even as sales leaders, I think like you can only really coach people and give them advice about cold calling if you're still in the trenches. Like what might have worked 3 years ago for me when I'm doing it might be completely irrelevant. It might be new technologies, different pushback for completely different times. So I always think that the moment you start taking a step back and you start getting your hands dirty and going in and doing that, whether it be your own accounts or like me and you will get involved in the team, will help them do it. I think when you stop doing it, it makes it so hard to then manage and direct other people to say, right, you need to be cold calling, this is what you need to do. When unless you're actually doing it, you're in the trenches, you know what it's like, you're not necessarily the best person to be telling them that. And that's why when we get new people into the business, for me, they want to do cold calling, I'll help them, I'll train them, I'll tell them what I think I can say, what I can push. The best person to get on with isn't me. It's let's go and get our best performing SDR who's just got and put 20 meetings in the last 2 weeks, who is probably far better than me and you are because they're doing it day in, day out. You've got to be, if you want to be good, you've got to surround yourself with good people and let them learn from people like
that. I'm just thinking back to small stories then. Perhaps not, but no, it's an ever-changing market. It's always interesting to keep on top of it, but the amount of people I don't think really pay attention to the news and think how can they do that and fit that into conversations. It's probably a big part actually of missing out. People that are not confident to make a call or think actually, how can I come across as, let's say, a more experienced sales person if they're new into the role. Also, there's a lot out there to help you that actually you can then talk about. You're ringing, directors or CXO level, whatever that may be. These people are, staying up to date with that kind of information. That they know what's happening in the world. So actually, that can often spark a conversation. It leads you right away from the product and why you're actually calling.
Yeah.
But actually, they'll be more engaged in the conversation then because they feel like they're having more of a in-depth and along their lines of thinking.
I think, again, that I think it's that reasonable saying is I don't think cold calling is dead, but I think cold calling without purpose or a reason is dead. So like you said, if you can find something relevant, something in the news that's going on in the industry, brilliant if you can find something about the company. Oh, just think you partnered up with this company here. Actually, I've found out this about them, and this has worked well with other companies that have gone through similar partnerships, whatever it may be. I mean, when you can find those reasons, I think you're more likely. You're still going to get those people who just tell you to go away. But I think on the whole, especially as we get cold calls all the time from people, actually not as many as I would anticipate. I get a lot more cold emails than I do cold calls. But I'll always be willing to give someone a listen if they've done their homework, done their research, they know something relevant, then you're willing to give your time more because I'm not just a number in a sequence, or I'm not just a number on a sheet that you're going through and calling. You've done a little bit of homework about me, you've understood what I'm trying to do. And that's when I think cold calling can still be effective. Because ultimately, the quickest way you're going to find out if someone's got a need for your services is just to talk to them. I love email sequences. I love the ability to bring technology in and bring us loads. We work in technology. We do love it, but you just can't replace talking to someone and going, "What's going on with you? What are your pain points? How can I help you?"
The beauty of it as well is like I think most SaaS, anything like that, they're generally going into emerging markets, whatever that may be. Whether it's fintech, regtech, stealth tech, whatever it may be. These people are dealing within markets that are changing pretty much overnight. Blockchain, crypto, like whatever it may be. Because these things go up and down, all day and night. And actually, there's always like different news, different things to pick up on, different things to have conversations with. It's around then just broadening your, I suppose, exposure to it, but also your up-to-date knowledge. Each morning, how's that changed? What can I perhaps have a conversation about today? I think some of the best demos, best sales I've ever been involved with or done often aren't actually talking too much about the product or showcasing it.
Yeah.
It's actually more around the market. What are we seeing? How can we be, how are we being consultative to them? And actually then as a kind of byproduct, what does our product do now? It's fronting actually, what's the core issue and then plugging the gaps. at the back.
It's like the cliche, isn't it? People buy from people. So if someone sees you as a valued partner, and they can see you can add value to them, and whether it be the company you're in, just moving forward, if they think you're going to be someone that's going to be useful to them and understands them, they're more likely to buy from you. And look, I've got people who have never really been that relevant to me, and never been, we've had opportunities, we've spoken, but it's never come to fruition. And then I've moved to a different company that works in a completely different field, and all of a sudden, we're a match made in heaven. But if I just got in, as you said, and I just told them exactly what my product is at that time without building the value into me as an individual and that I know what I'm talking about, when I message them 2-3 years later, hey, look, do you remember me? Like, I'm doing this now, I think it could be really good. I know you've dealt with this in the past, X, Y, and Z. All of a sudden then, they're going to be willing to hear me out because they go, well, actually, when I last worked and spoke with Ellis, yeah, he did know what he was talking about. He didn't just feature dump or product dump. And then you've got that connection. I think that's quite undervalued, really, from a lot of salespeople, because some people can just become a number in a sequence and not really have that trying to think of the right word, not friendship, because I can't say they're all my friends, but like that personal relationship. I'd like to
Depends on the other ones.
Yeah, if they didn't sign on the last day of the month, then all of a sudden they're probably not on my Christmas card list. But yeah, it's just finding that relationship where you can mutually be beneficial to each other moving forward as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think, ultimately as well, whatever it is you said, so like selling to people and people buy from people. Some of the best conversations that you'll have, if there's a client local, take them out for a beer. Ultimately, you sat there, somebody's had a couple of beers and they're, a couple of gins, whatever it may be, people tend to loosen up and you'll have your best conversations then. And quite often that's where you'll lead. It's about getting personal with that person to a degree. It's about, them putting a face to a name, a personality to it, and understanding that you're going to be there on that journey with them through that sale, through partnership that's coming to fruition. And often, I think probably COVID and all its nightmare has really taken that away from a lot of people. It's like, do a video call.
Yeah,
but actually, it sometimes creates more of a barrier than what it needs to be.
I tell you what, because I think this will be quite a good way to wrap up. Because to be honest, we could probably just talk about cold calling for hours because it's such a major part of the sales world. But the one last point, obviously, with the purpose has been looking at cold calling techniques that we use to work it well. Recently, we did have someone who booked a cold call. No, it wasn't a cold call. They did some outreach to our marketing team. And to your point about go and have a beer or go and grab a coffee, they sent them as part of it. Here's a meeting in our diary. We want them to turn up for the demo. We all know booking the meeting's only half of it, needing to actually turn up. Here's a voucher for a coffee. Go and grab yourself a coffee from Costa, and I'll see you on the call. And it's a valid voucher. It's probably costing them, maybe £2. They're probably buying it in bulk. But that £2, they spoke to us afterwards, and they said, yeah, we've seen a 60% increase at our demos attended because some people take the coffee voucher and run, some people never claim the coffee, still turn up for the demo. On the whole, a lot of people would go, I've got myself a free coffee. Fine, the least I can do is go and listen to hear them out. And it's that thing of it becomes more informal. You sat there, we're having a coffee, we're having a beer, we're talking, we're doing whatever to build that relationship out. But
just making people relaxed. Again, they're own people. Making them relaxed, what's everybody's home comfort, where are people most relaxed? Put them in that format, put them in that situation. Be amazed how quickly conversations over, where you can actually start asking the difficult questions and ultimately find out the information that you need.
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably time we wrap it up there before we go into another whole subject. We've got plenty more podcasts to come. But been really insightful. Appreciate you jumping on. And no doubt we'll have you on some future episodes as well. Maybe even as a host if we can send you back at some point. But we'll end it there. Pleasure as always. And on that note, should we go and grab a beer?
Pleasure as always. Sounds good to me.